you identify, okay, here's where my expectations of motherhood came from. I think you can follow it up with also like, what are some of the shoulds or values
Yeah.
or specific expectations that I think mothers are supposed to do?
Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome back to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm really stoked on today's episode. We're going to be talking about the expectations we might have of motherhood, because we all know that if you are somebody who has dreamed about being a mom, you've wanted to have kids, you probably have had expectations of what that's going to look like. And then the reality is oftentimes different than what we expected, whether that's like just fully different or there's just little pieces that are different. And navigating those unexpected parts of motherhood and figuring out, like, why is this different? Am I doing something wrong? Like, just all of it can be something that is challenging and hard to talk about at times. And so we're going to be talking about navigating the unexpected in motherhood and really looking at that from a mental health perspective as well, just to understand how it does impact us when we are faced with a difference in the expectation versus the reality. So joining us today for this conversation is Shanti Hollis. She is a mental health counselor with a heart dedicated to supporting moms. And she became a mom 2 years ago. And when she did, she embarked on her own journey into motherhood, which ignited this passion for guiding fellow mothers through the ups and downs of motherhood. Her story is one that so many mothers can relate to, because despite meticulous planning, she found herself facing unexpected challenges after conception and post-delivery. So Shanti, welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm so happy we are finally having this conversation. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us about who you are, your family, and the work that you do.
Definitely. And thank you so much for having me here. This is my first podcast to talk about motherhood stuff. So I'm coming out of my skin a little bit.
Oh, I love it.
Yes. So I'm a mom of a 2-year-old little boy. I live in Jacksonville, Florida, and I work in a private practice called Elbow Tree. So I do contract work with them, and I am the most passionate about working with moms. So I started out my mental health career as a school counselor. So I worked with elementary age students, and I absolutely loved that. But when I moved into the private practice realm, because I knew that I wanted to be a mom, and so I wanted a job that was a lot more flexible, so I could be home at the end of the day and be there in the morning and sometimes even time. Private practice was just a better fit. And honestly, though, I would say my desire and my love for maternal care started in childhood. So, did you ever watch, I think it was the TLC channel where there's a show, Bringing Home Baby or a Baby Story?
I mean, I
And
watched a
it
lot of
literally was just a
TLC.
show where yeah, yeah. It was just a show where families got pregnant, and then it showed them going to the hospital, having the baby, and then bringing the baby home. And I was mesmerized by that. And not so much maybe in the baby, but just the idea that a woman is just going through life. She carries this baby, and then the baby comes out and she's a mom. So I would say that my interest in motherhood started there. And then just from seeing all the different issues that women face, and infertility or miscarriage or postpartum depression or anxiety, I decided that I wanted to just deep dive in, and that's where I am now.
I love that your passion for this started before becoming a mom in some way, right? Like it ignited in your own
Mhm.
childhood. And I think it's really
Mhm.
interesting to think about for women who do become mothers, what a huge impact that has on our lives, right? Like you said, there's from conception and, fertility issues, whatever it is, but whether something's planned or unplanned, and then into having a child and the intense impact that has on your life when it comes to so many things, right? Like literally the way you can spend your time and energy, your mental health. So many women do, face postpartum mental health issues, and then just the changes in your mental health beyond that, in just the fact that you're raising a human being and life is different. And so it really is an interesting thing to reflect on and to understand that becoming a mom is a big deal. And it's something that we can look at as a big
Yeah.
deal and we can talk about it like it's a big deal.
Mhm.
I'm curious if there's anything in your own story of becoming a mom that inspired you besides like moving from the school practice to a private practice. Was there anything in your own experience that surprised you and maybe gave you insight into why supporting moms was the way for you to go?
Sure, definitely. I think I was just surprised at how hard and like you said, how much of a big deal being a mom or becoming a mom is. And I often like to use the word becoming. And when
Mhm.
I mean becoming, I don't mean like a positive pregnancy test and now you have a baby. I think that is honestly where I feel like society gets it wrong because we're like, oh, like you have the baby, like you're good, like everything's great. When in reality, I've been really looking at motherhood a lot like puberty, actually, where at the beginning of puberty, like someone looks different. And like for boys, like their voices sound different. And at the end, they get taller and like they smell a little bit different. And their thoughts about themselves and their peers are different. And the same thing happens with motherhood. So I would say just the fact that I saw my life be rearranged, and I'm not saying this
Mhm.
is good or bad, it's just a part of it. I saw how my life was rearranged over this like monumental event. And then I also saw like the lack of supports that are just naturally there. I would say I am well supported, but a lot of that came from me having a background in mental health and knowing that I could hire a mental health counselor who specializes in perinatal mental health, or knowing that I could hire a doula, or just the luxury of having my parents and my sisters nearby, but realizing that that is not the same thing for every mom. So I would say that in itself was also another catalyst for wanting to support moms.
Yeah, that point about support, and even if you have the resources to have the support and the like knowledge that that's something that you have access to and that you may need, right? Like, as somebody who comes from a mental health background, that's something you know is like a reality that
Mhm.
having support in those areas is important. But knowing that like our world and our society isn't necessarily set up in a way where that's the norm for moms. And even if you do have those supports, it can still, like, we're not necessarily supported in every area of becoming a mom, right? Like our world just isn't set up to
Sure.
support that full transition. And so I think that's like really incredible that you had that. And also like acknowledging that there's so much space for supporting other moms.
Yeah.
So, when you are working with moms, and maybe in your own life as well, what do you see as the way in which our expectations of what motherhood will look like, and then the actual experience that we have in motherhood? How do you see that impacting mental health?
Sure. I would say for me, my motherhood journey started actually with loss. So I was pregnant before my son and I miscarried. And I miscarried early. So for some people, it's like, oh, you just had like a period that came. But I've been menstruating my whole life. I'm 33 my whole life, but I've been menstruating since puberty. I've never had a period like that. So started with loss. I would dare say that that was actually a really traumatic and confusing event.
Yeah.
And I, for some reason, had this idea that, like, oh, I'm pregnant, positive test, like, it will be bliss and beautiful. And that experience was not beautiful at all. And then from that came a lot of anxiety about, like, do I want to get pregnant again? Do I want to risk feeling joyful about something and then having that joy be taken away from me? So I would say that for a lot of the clients that I deal with, it's a variety of things: grief, unexpected trauma, unexpected loss, a shift in identity, mom rage, anxiety, depression, a variety of things.
Yeah, I mean there's so much in there. Like you said, the shift in identity, the mom rage,
Mhm.
the fear and anxiety, whether that's from experiencing your own loss or just like knowing it's a possibility. And, I know that there's a lot of moms who do face anxiety, whether it's, in pregnancy or after the baby's born, that has to do with the safety of their children and things like that. And it's like there's
Yeah.
so much that just that we don't necessarily know we're going to be dealing with when we have a baby, right? Like you can't anticipate that necessarily in completion of what that will feel like, especially because there are like factors where like you could be dealing with like hormonal things that cause the anxiety as well.
Sure.
And so there's so many things that impact that. When it comes to working with moms who are dealing with maybe anxiety around some of those differences in what they expected versus what it actually looks like. How do you support moms in managing that?
Sure. I think one of a great exercise that I like all moms to do is honestly just answering the question when I was thinking about becoming a mom,
Hmm.
like where did my expectations come from? And so for some, they'll say, oh, my expectation came from social media, from Instagrammers that I follow, or moms on TikTok, or I watch like the day in the life, or let me get my newborn ready on YouTube. For others, it could be moms maybe they saw at church or their own mom. I think my like a lot of my pregnancy things or like my expectations for motherhood came from my older sister. So she's about 11 years older than me. And so I saw both of her pregnancies from beginning to like the boys making their way into the world. And from my vague memory, it seemed seamless compared to some of
Hmm.
the different things that I experienced. So it's important to know that, okay, I am obviously comparing this to something. And so I think when you can identify where that is and then also just deconstruct that. So as much as like I admired my sister's pregnancies, I seem to have forgotten that like my sister also experienced a loss and my sister also had to reconcile with, do I go back to work or do I stay home? And I remember she was a teacher at the time. She went to school literally I think for half the day and was like, I can never do this. I have to come back home. And she left the class and someone covered for her and she's not gone back to work since. And so even saying that to you, I'm like, oh yeah, like that wasn't perfect for her. Like I'm not alone in that struggle of do I work full time or do I stay part time or like how do I be a mom? So I think really just deconstructing where that expectation came from and then just asking yourself like what is actually realistic? Because
Hmm.
especially when you're getting things from social media, a lot of times you're just seeing the highlight reel. So
Yeah.
that may be like a 12-hour edited video of someone's life, but that is not their whole week. That's not their whole journey.
That is something that I think is really
Mhm.
important to like explicitly call out that whether it's people in our own lives that we are seeing and comparing ourselves to, and obviously that's probably more likely to be a realistic representation than what we see on social media, but even people in our own lives that we're seeing, we're not seeing all of it, right? There's no way. I sometimes reflect on this time I took my two little boys to a restaurant and they were like, it was just me and them. It was really busy. We went for breakfast and they were so well behaved. Like to everyone looking at us, they were like, oh my goodness, these kids are amazing. Like all these things. I had people coming up to me being
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
good job, mom, all these things. That's not how my kids are. Like, that's not at all how my kids are. And so acknowledging that, like, we can see a moment that looks really perfect and we can see a lot of moments that look really perfect or like, the mom is handling this so well and acknowledging that like that doesn't necessarily reflect everything that's going on. And then when it comes to social media, that's like a whole other thing because not only is so much of it so curated, so edited, and so much of like I'm actually showing the highlight reels, but even for people that you may follow that are posting more like honest, vulnerable content, you are obviously not seeing it all. Like there are just things that you're not going to see no matter how real somebody is being. And so
sure.
we just have to keep that in mind. And I think that's such an important thing of like actually reflecting on and like taking the time to be intentional about reflecting on where do these expectations come from because we might not realize what the image was created from. It could be like I watched
Mhm.
this TV show growing up. And I just thought that's what motherhood would be like. It's like, well,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah, yeah,
that's not a good representation of reality because it's a
yeah,
scripted
yeah.
TV show. So I think that's a really like an important thing that we all can do here and now to kind of understand that difference.
Definitely. And I think one big part is just really learning to establish your own voice. So
Uh-huh.
as you do that, where you identify, okay, here's where my expectations of motherhood came from, I think you can follow it up with also like, what are some of the shoulds or values
Yeah.
or specific expectations that I think mothers are supposed to do? So for some, it could be like, I think mom, oh, this is one of mine. Like, I sometimes am like, I wish I was like a baking mom because I feel like moms should bake their kids like cookies from scratch and bake cakes. But then I step back and I'm like, well, Shanti, you don't bake. You don't necessarily enjoy baking, but you enjoy like dance parties in the kitchen and playing in the kiddie pool and going to the beach and painting and like all these other stuff. So just because you don't do this one thing that somewhere in your brain you think like good moms do, like it doesn't mean you're not a good mom,
Mm-hmm.
because who's to say that like you should bake? And I use that example because sometimes it is something so minor and
Yeah.
like so unimportant, like baking. And you don't realize that that is baggage that you're carrying around. Or you go to school and you see all the kids like eating like homemade cookies, or that's probably not even happening. But then like your shame voice is talking, and it's like, oh, my child isn't as happy or isn't as well fed because their meal isn't 100% made from scratch. And that's a complete lie.
Yeah, it's even like in the content that we consume. If you see like a mom who bakes all the time with her kids, and you're like, that's something a good mom does. And then you see another mom going to the beach with her kids. And then you see another mom doing these things. And we put it together of like, well, good moms do all these things. And even the people that
Yeah.
we're watching do those things aren't doing all those things. And they're also like making content of it, which is like fine. I mean, like totally
Yeah.
fine, right? Like we
Yeah.
both have social media presences. Like it's not a bad thing that that's out there, but like being really conscious, yeah, about like what we're taking in and understanding is like what it means to be a quote good mom and like getting clear
Sure.
that that's the interpretation we might be taking of it. And when you can like actually see that, you can start to kind of like parse apart of like, that's actually not something I value. Like I didn't bake
Yeah.
before I had kids. Why would I start doing that now? Like maybe I will
Sure.
try
Yeah.
it someday, but like that has nothing to do with me being a good mom.
Definitely.
So I'm wondering something that I'm curious. You do EMDR therapy, and I'm just curious if you can
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about what that looks like. I'm curious to learn more about the
Sure.
practice and figure other listeners might be as well.
Yes, yes. So EMDR therapy stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So EMDR is wonderful for moms specifically because when our children are little, we may not have a lot of time. And so
Hmm.
I found that with my EMDR clients versus my clients that are doing like standard talk therapy, so something maybe like cognitive behavioral therapy, we can accomplish a lot more success or a lot more of our goals with EMDR. So I currently use EMDR to work with moms that are dealing with birth trauma, that are dealing with depression or anxiety, even postpartum OCD. And so the idea is that in life, when things that are traumatic, upsetting, or confusing happen, our brain kind of like turns on a light on that pathway in our brain. And when you like smell a smell, you get triggered by it, and your brain is like sent back to that original thing. And then now you're like really emotional and you're not able to be very present. And so with EMDR, it helps you access a part of your brain that you access generally during REM sleep, but we do it when you're awake, and you do it by using bilateral stimulation. So it's whether it's like tapping, or there's videos of Prince Harry following a light. So you can look that up if you Google Prince Harry did EMDR. And so what it does, it helps your brain refile some of those foundational incidents that may be contributing to the trauma, the depression, the anxiety, the PTSD, the OCD, and it refiles it in a way that's more adaptive or more helpful or more true. So, an example could be if I maybe was in a car accident. After EMDR, I may not be triggered by driving, and I may be able to drive myself around and take my baby to their doctor's appointments. And my negative belief before EMDR could have been something like, I'm not safe. Whereas after EMDR, I now know that I am safe, and all of like the emotionality and like the triggers associated with driving would have gone down.
Our brains are so fascinating. It's so
Yeah,
amazing just like thinking about like how we can reprogram our brains in that way. Do you
yeah,
have any examples of like how that could be used with a mom? Because you said like, it's the trigger and like relinking the trigger to a different thought kind of. I'm
sure.
curious because there's so many things in motherhood that can be so triggering, right? Like I think about for
Mhm.
me, something that I speak about is like mom rage and like getting really angry and
Yeah,
upset when it comes to overstimulating things and touch and things like that. So like triggers can be huge in
sure,
motherhood. How could that look
sure.
for a mom in those situations?
Definitely, I say if a mom has experienced a loss and they have
Hmm.
access to an EMDR therapist, do it. Because what I found in my situation, I didn't do EMDR between my first pregnancy and my second one.
Okay.
But if I would have, it would have restored like some of that joy and like the
Yeah.
anticipation and like just the beauty of those first couple of months. So I would say that would be an example. If it's someone who's dealing maybe with mom rage, and that mom rage stems from like maybe having like some perfectionist parts
Uh-huh.
where maybe that mom negative beliefs is that I am not good enough. And so maybe like they keep a clean house and they keep a well stocked fridge and like perfectly primp themselves and their children as a way to kind of like gain self esteem. So their negative belief is maybe I'm not good enough. So with EMDR, we can treatment plan where your positive belief would be I'm good enough just as I am. And so our goal would be that when your home is a mess and when all the toys are everywhere and when the kids are running around and there's spaghetti sauce on the fridge, the goldfish in the backseat of the car, mom will still probably be annoyed because like that's annoying. But what we're looking for is a scale. So I always try to say that our reaction should match the size of the problem. So, for example, if your child crumples some crackers and they make the backseat of the car dirty, I would say that's somewhere lower on the scale.
Yeah.
But a mom who's really dysregulated or dealing with a lot of mom rage is probably at the top. And so our goal with EMDR is that after processing that your responses will match the size of the problem that you're actually dealing with.
That seems like it could be a really good like measuring stick for anyone who is dealing with big emotions to know whether like they should be getting support, whether it's EMDR therapy or
Yeah.
another type of therapy in general. Like the reaction size, does this make sense for like the thing that I'm experiencing? And I do think for so many moms that gets kind of out of whack because there are so many. It's like
Yeah.
having kids can be so like just a lot, right? And it can be the first time we've
Destabilizing.
ever, yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's like for so
Yeah.
many of us, the first time that we've ever had something like that controlling so much of our life, I guess. Like, I don't, it's like every part of our life is
Yeah.
touched by having kids, even just how we are able to sit on the couch in the afternoon, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
impacted by our kids.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think that's like a good way to kind of call out whether somebody may need support in an area of their life from a
Yes.
therapist.
And I always say that in those moments where your reaction
Uh-huh.
doesn't match the size of the problem, one, like you're saying, that is a sign that you may want to seek out help. But also, that's another sign that what you're getting angry about or even sad about is
Hmm.
probably not the thing right in front of you, probably
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense, right? That's something that,
Yeah.
again, there's usually a lot that we need to process behind those triggers. Is there anything else, like any other advice for moms who maybe are dealing with anxiety or just like complex feelings about motherhood looking different than they expected?
Sure. I think it's really important to find your tribe.
Uh-huh.
And what I mean by that, there are a variety of women in my life who, because we're all around the same age, we got pregnant at the same time. And I found that with some of them, I'm completely comfortable being transparent about the good and the ugly. And then I found with others, it's like, oh, I noticed they don't have a capacity for the ugly, but
Hmm.
they can handle the good. And that could be a sign that they're dealing with their own ugly and just like we have to respect each other's
Yeah.
boundaries. So I would say whether it's finding a support group somewhere, I know someone recently who she did use successfully the Peanut app. So a friend of
Hmm.
mine lives in Michigan and she wasn't making any mom friends in any of the ways that she tried. And so she logged on to Peanut. And I think she met about 4 or 5 other women who are able to like operate as a tribe for her. And so I know for myself, even just starting an Instagram account or even a TikTok, like there are plenty of moms out there. And even if it's just like a DM or maybe they live locally and you can meet up for coffee, it is important to find other people. Because what I do find is that like our inner critic, and I call that just like that little voice that says like, you're not good enough, or you're a bad mom because you're overwhelmed, or you should be enjoying this. Why aren't you enjoying this? It can get very loud when we're isolated. But for me
Yeah.
personally, when I'm around other moms that can say, I love my child, but like, can I go to the bathroom alone? it's like, oh, like that's not just me. Like nothing is wrong with me. And then I often find that I feel like recharged to come back home and I can make light of some of those things that are kind of annoying.
There's something so powerful about like having your experiences validated when you like share something that might feel like something's wrong with you, right? Like, oh, I hate that I feel this way about, not being able to go to the bathroom alone. To be able to say it and be like, yeah, girl, I get it. Like, and then it does like take some of the shame away from like
Yeah,
having a negative feeling, just to speak something and have it validated and understood by another mom
sure.
who's going through the same thing. And whether it's, something little like that or just like this happened yesterday and it sucks. It's like, oh, I get that. It's really powerful to be able to have people to like share in that with.
Yes.
So, something that I love to ask moms who are on this podcast towards the end of episodes is about self care and how you take care of yourself, because I think that it's important that we're normalizing conversations about moms being able to put themselves high on the priority list in terms of like making sure their needs are being met. So, I'd love to know how you take care of yourself and if you have any advice for moms to make sure that they are caring for themselves regularly as well.
Sure. I would say my biggest like concept when it comes to self-care is to one, embrace flexibility. I do mean in my day-to-day, but just recognizing that little ones, especially when like a newborn on, I feel like they change and their needs are a little bit different each season. And so as a result, my needs are different each season. And so for me, what I was doing for self-care when my son was 3 months is not the same thing that I can do now for self care. And that is really positive. So I always like to take an inventory of, okay, hey, I probably have a little bit more time to care for myself now that he's almost 2.5. What am I missing and how can I fill in those gaps? And then I also say, too, that it's okay to have a hobby. It is okay to have an activity that you do by yourself or with a group of friends or with some strangers that your child is not invited to, that your child doesn't take part in. And so for me, that hobby is generally gardening. I love to teach him about it. So I will take him out to the garden and we'll pick tomatoes. But more often than not, like me watering the garden is my like moment to decompress and to ground. And like I like to take my shoes off and I do all my gardening like without gloves so I can feel the dirt. So I'd say just always make time for it. So I plan my morning around that. Like I don't go into the office before I've been able to go outside to water, and then I do it again when I come home. And then for me personally, my next thing is that I know that I have to eat. So I do not play around when it comes to meals and water. And then I do next try to prioritize sleep. And those are like basic things. But I do feel like as moms, and I say this just from friends, I have friends that feed their kids like these beautiful meals, but they don't eat anything. And so I've just made a vow to not do that. And then everything else is just cherry on the top. So I'm going to visit a friend next week. And that to me is just a deep, deep level of self care. But I try to like just keep up with some of my basics during the week.
Yeah, like that is a huge thing, is like making sure those basic needs are being met, because it's going to be really hard to do anything else for anyone else or yourself if you are running on like no sleep, or running on, you're dehydrated and feeling like crap because of it, or like,
Yeah.
not eating enough. We all know what happens when you don't eat, right? Like you get hangry, and also it's just not good for your body. And so I think that's a really important reminder. And then I think, yeah, like that permission to do things without your kids. And like you can involve your kids in things that are exciting for you, teaching them about the garden, baking with them, whatever the things are, but knowing that like also having that space and using your hobbies as a way to like connect with yourself and to have that time to decompress and have that time to just be and exist outside of that role of mother is like a really beautiful thing that we should be gifting ourselves with as much as we can. I love
Definitely.
that.
And I think the part of it, when I go back to the word becoming, you are
Uh-huh.
becoming a mom. It's something that happens in all parts of your life. So even when I am outside gardening alone, or the trip that I'm going on with a friend is for a few nights. I've never left my
Mm-hmm.
2-year-old before, but I'm going to do it. And I'm still a mom,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to nurture other parts of me that really need to be nurtured. And so that is okay. It doesn't make me any less of a mom, because I'm really committed to more like a holistic transformation of myself, and not just one that is like just laser focused on my child. Like it's both of us.
Oh, I love that. It's both of us. That is such a beautiful sentiment and a great little note to leave this conversation on. Where can listeners find you? How can they, see your content and even maybe work with you if that's something they're looking for?
Sure, definitely. So you can find me pretty much most days out of the week at Motherhood with Shanti on Instagram. And then I do have an account that's geared towards more like mental health and EMDR. And so that is at Something New with Shanti. And I would love for you guys to give me a follow and just to say hello and tell me that you found me here. And then if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and I'd love to answer them.
Definitely give her a follow. It's really great stuff. There's some gardening content on there and just a lot of good reminders of, I don't know, good reminders that I think we all need. And there's things that you'll post that I'm like, oh, that resonates today. That really resonates today. So definitely recommend the follow. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being here. This was such a beautiful conversation. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to share all of this with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. I feel so privileged to have been here.
Ugh. And thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love for you to head to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. Let us know what you thought of the episode. Let us know if there's anything that stood out to you as a big takeaway. And we'll be back next week. You are worthy, Mama.